And so Titanic begins really way back when you, diving, as you do a lot,
Yeah.
you go down to the wreck of the Titanic and shoot some documentary footage.
Yeah, I mean, it really starts with me being a scuba diver and loving wreck diving and so on, and exploring wrecks and thinking, well, what's the ultimate shipwreck, the Titanic? The presentation I made to Fox was very simple. I walked in with Ken Marshall's beautiful book of paintings of the Titanic, whapped it open on Peter Chernon's coffee table in his office, and there's big double page painting of the ship sinking with all the lifeboats and the distress flares going off, and said, "Romeo and Juliet on the Titanic." That was it. And seriously, I mean, it was like, actually, it was my best pitch if you think about it, 'cause I'm usually pretty terrible at pitching. But you know, my real goal was to actually go dive the shipwreck. Making the movie was kind of secondary in my mind at that point. And people make decisions for strange reasons, you know. And my pitch on that was had to be a little more detailed. I said, look, I'd written the script at that point, and I said, we've got to do this whole opening where they're exploring the Titanic and they find the diamond. So we're going to have all these shots of the ship. Now we can either do them with elaborate models and motion control shots and CG and all that, which will cost X amount of money, or we can spend X plus 30% and actually go shoot it at the real wreck, and it'll be a publicity coup, and you can basically take it from the marketing budget, which actually proved to be the case. I think the amount of free media that we got off of having actually dived to the wreck was pretty awesome, and really helped the public awareness of the film right before the release.
So with this sort of tripartite thing of the historical detail and obviously the spectacular effects and this very strong emotional story, did you approach Titanic in a different way?
Well, I did a lot more research. I mean, these other films were sort of fantasy science fiction. I didn't need a lot of technical veracity or historical veracity to it. But with Titanic, I approached it very differently. I read everything I could read. I created an extremely detailed timeline of the ship's few days, and a very detailed timeline of the last night of its life, and I worked within that to write the script, and then I got in some historical experts to sort of analyze what I'd written and comment on it, and I adjusted it. We wanted this to be a definitive visualization of this moment in history, as if you had gone back in a time machine and shot it. But then, of course, overlaid and woven through that is this love story.
I did read something once that you said that you felt Titanic had pushed to the limit how much time you can spend on character in mainstream filmmaking.
I suppose what I was talking about is that it was a 3-hour and 15-minute movie, and by the time the credits are rolling on the majority of films, nothing's pretty much happened except that, when he saves her here, and then they do a little spitting over the railing, he does a little drawing, they fall in love, they run around the ship, I mean, it's really nothing but character and the development of a relationship for 2 hours. Then a whole bunch of bad stuff happens, which structurally is a very strange form. It's a very strange architecture for a movie, but it worked, because the only way all that disaster stuff later meant anything to you as an audience was because you cared about them. And I don't think the film could have sustained that if it wasn't, if you didn't know what was going to happen, if there wasn't in the back of your mind this sort of ticking clock and this sense of doom over the whole thing, the innocence of that, the joyfulness of that, of their relationship, and just simply spending time on that wouldn't have worked.
And of course, as we know, it all worked out awfully well in the end. So at that point, that must have been, when you came to consider the next thing, somewhat inhibiting.
What happened after Titanic was, and bear in mind that I made the movie because I wanted to dive to the wreck. I basically got hooked on deep ocean exploration, and there was a thrill in that was greater than the glitz of a red carpet, winning an Academy Award. These were all, I mean, I don't mean to diminish them. They're wonderful experiences, but there was something very real, and yet in a science fiction fantasy kind of way, about exploring inner space and getting to actually do that. I always wanted to go to space, couldn't do that, but I could go to the bottom of the ocean. So I wound up working with the Russian submersibles on 6 subsequent deep ocean expeditions over a 5-year period, made 4 documentary films in that time. I always justified it to myself that I was perfecting the 3D technique to do a 3D movie in the future, and in fact that was true. We were doing that, but also just having an amazing time and raising a family, having children. I knew that the kind of commitment that I made to a movie didn't allow me to have any free time. I would just work 7 days a week, and it was completely consuming, and I wasn't willing to do that either. So everything just kind of worked out the way it was meant to work out from my perspective. From the external view, it seems like I just sort of went away and then came back with Avatar.
But in fact, the idea for Avatar, I think you'd had a long time back,
Prior,
hadn't
yeah,
you?
yeah.
But it was a question of the technique. So what, the idea
Yes.
was the 3D one, or the idea was the virtual reality?
Yeah, it was the virtual reality piece that wasn't there. The 3D we had worked out even when we started Avatar. Back in '95, I wrote Avatar partially because, it's something I'd always wanted to do. It was a real dream project, a fantasy story taking place on another planet with all these cool creatures. It was going to be like the ultimate creature movie, and just the design alone was what attracted me to the project. But it just didn't seem like, and then I shot Titanic, and by after Titanic, my company, Digital Domain, was supposed to have all the answers for how to make this movie. I'd given them 2 years after all. And when I came back, they still said, this isn't going to happen without a ridiculous amount of money and time. So then when it looked like the CG was beginning to mature enough that we could make Avatar if we were willing to sort of push it a little bit to the next level, then we started the film in '05. And we still had 2 years of research and development to develop our performance capture pipeline up to our level where we thought that the characters would be fully believable.
And this is where you use a head rig, basically,
Yeah, a head rig.
and instead of using the little sensor things which people had used in performance capture.
Right. Well, the mistake they'd been making previously is they put marker dots all over the body, and they'd capture the body motion, but they'd use the same marker dot or these little spherical markers. They'd glue them all over the actor's face. Well, you've sort of got 200 some muscles in your body. Half of them are in your face. So there's a whole kind of order of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude, more information, more data that's required about the face to actually make it real. And of course, they weren't getting anything from the eyeballs themselves, the eye movement, because they weren't gluing markers on the people's eyes, at least not that I ever heard of. So we decided to take a completely different approach, which was to create a head rig. The idea was that we would photograph the face in a close-up 100% of the time while the actor worked, but not just a close-up sort of from a camera off somewhere, but locked to the head so that it was essentially nulled out, so that that data could be put into the computer, and then rates of change and edges and so on, optical flow, could be used to track all the features of the face as if they were markers. So in essence, a kind of infinite marker set.
I've got one final question for you, which is that obviously Avatar is a great showcase for all this groundbreaking new technology, as
Yeah.
you've done before.
Yeah.
And we already know, although you may not say exactly what your next project is, that you're thinking ahead, because that's how you work.
Sure.
So what's the next big thing in cinema then?
Well, I mean, for me, Avatar was such an experimental process. And I know that we made a lot of mistakes. We went down some blind alleys, and we meandered a bit, and it took us a lot to kind of work out exactly how to do everything. I think the next big challenge, honestly, is a process challenge for me. It's a challenge of being able to get the same end result as Avatar in less time, more efficiently, for less money.
But the idea of real in cinema, as in, because Pandora
It's meaningless now.
Exactly.
The idea of what's real. I think the lines will just continue to blur between CG and photography until it becomes meaningless. Whether you capture something with a lens or you use imaginary photons in CG, the rules of lighting are the same. I mean, when if you want sunlight, you create sunlight. You either do it with a xenon light or 12K HMI, or you do it with a sun source in global illumination in a CG scene file. It's the same thing. You have to imagine the sunlight. In neither case, usually, is it actually sunlight. Because I mean, all cinematography is a form of artifice anyway, masquerading as reality, and the CG does the same thing. I just think it's going to become more seamless as we go along, and less relevant to even sort of dissect it or deconstruct it into what its component parts are.
James Cameron, it's been a pleasure to talk to you about your life in pictures. Thank you very much indeed.